on mental health in elite athletes. He also serves as the USTA's chairman of the board and president. Naomi Osaka has been ranked world number 1 and is the first Asian player to hold the top ranking in singles. Osaka is a 4-time Grand Slam singles champion. Her impact is felt well beyond the court in her role as a social justice activist, entrepreneur, and, of course, a mother. Michael Phelps is the most successful and most decorated Olympian of all time, with a total of 28 medals. After winning 8 gold medals in 2008, he used his performance bonus to establish the Michael Phelps Foundation, which promotes both physical and mental health and well-being. Dr. Vivek H. Murthy is the Surgeon General of the United States. As the nation's doctor, his mission is to lay the foundation for a healthier country. Dr. Murthy commands a uniformed service of over 6,000 public health officers dedicated to serving the most underserved and vulnerable populations domestically and abroad.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I really want to begin by thanking again Michael, Naomi, Dr. Vivek Murthy. Dr. Murthy, for those of you who don't know, also is a mentor to me, a colleague, and a friend. And on the stage, he will be Vivek with all of us. And thank you for joining us. So this is the 2023 U.S. Open. Importantly, the U.S. Open and the USTA believe that sport is a public good, that sport can and should positively influence society. For any of you who have been on the ground, you have seen and heard that we are celebrating 50 years. 50 years ago, the U.S. Open was the first major sporting event in the world to offer equal prize money to men and women, setting an example for society. Well, today we're setting another example for society, that mental health matters. And I want to begin by talking about the stigma of mental health care seeking. In sport, we're often told to just tough it out, to suck it up. Don't let your weaknesses show. And we have 2 great leaders in sport on stage, Michael and Naomi, and you have spoken out, you have been courageous and said, well, wait a minute, this stigma is not right. We need to talk about mental health. We need to talk about mental health care seeking. Naomi, if I can begin with you, what led you to that journey where you were really helping to shape the world, to change the stigma of mental health care seeking in sport?
Honestly, for me, it was a little selfish. Like, I wasn't really thinking too much about everyone else, if we're being 100% honest. I was just thinking about, like, how I feel and how I would like to express myself. And at the time, I just felt like I needed to, like, step back. And I do, like, remember in the back of my head, I was thinking, like, growing up, I was told kind of to tough it out, and I was in my head thinking, like, athletes are supposed to, you know, like, stick it out, and you're actually weak if you show your emotions and things like that. So it was like a very big internal battle.
Yeah. And Michael, I think, well, look, being the most decorated Olympian, and it was perhaps even shocking when you started talking about the symptoms of maybe feeling detached or depressed or lonely. And so, and you shaped the world with that. But what was that journey like?
Well, I mean, I think for me, my mental health journey started probably back in 2004. I think that's really when I experienced post-Olympic depression. I came off this high from an Olympic Games and, you know, kind of got to the edge. And I was like, well, what do you do? Where do we go from here? The Olympics are finished. So the only thing I did was get back into the pool. Started training again. Stuffed all of those things down. Compartmentalized those things. And over time, they got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And they just kept showing their face. So I kept pushing. And I got to the breaking point in 2014 where I didn't want to be alive. And for me, I decided that something had to change. So for me, I had to become vulnerable for the first time in my life. And vulnerable is a very scary word. Change is a scary thing. So for me to become vulnerable for the first time ever was a process, a learning process. And that process has given me the chance to now be able to talk about the things that I've gone through and hopefully save a life. That's my number one mission right now is trying to help people that are suffering like we have. And I'll just say to you, since we're sitting here, how you composed your words and posted them on social. To me, it sends chills up my body right now thinking about it. Because we don't know how many people we're saving by those messages, but I guarantee you there are people out there that are reading that stuff that you're saving, that you saved. I still to this day, it was so moving. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for sharing that.
Well, Michael, in the pool and in your training, and you have your ups and downs, but you're kind of in control. And now you're talking about this moment of vulnerability, and life is different. And Vivek, as a physician, a treating physician, and now really the physician for our country, you see this in society. We aren't always in control. But how do we really take that and take a message that mental health care seeking is fine, that we maybe need to show our vulnerabilities and ask for help?
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that we were just having this conversation. To think even 10 years ago about having a discussion like this would have been perhaps improbable. But one of the things that we're coming to terms with is something that as a doctor I used to see in the hospital every day, which is that mental health really is health. It's no less important than your physical health. And I think of mental health as the fuel that allows you to do everything else in your life, to show up for your family, to show up at work, to show up in your sport, to show up for your community, to be there for yourself. And when our mental health suffers, all of those other dimensions suffer as well. It's like cutting off, again, this vital fuel. If we're not able to talk about that, if we're not able to acknowledge the times when we struggle and to talk about how we replenish and support our mental health and well-being, then that's like going through life with one arm tied behind our back without being able to embrace the fullness of who we are. But it also cuts us off from each other. And what has been happening for too long is that so many people are struggling, but they're struggling in silence. They're not talking about their mental health issues, and so they feel like, hey, I'm the only one who's struggling here. Something must be wrong with me. All those other people, based on what they're posting on social, the way they're talking at parties, the number of parties they're attending, they must be having great lives. And I'm the only one who's out here struggling. But that's just not true. And I had the privilege and opportunity to see that as I talked to patients over the years and realize that, wow, a lot of them are really struggling with their mental health and well-being. So I think the pandemic in particular really pulled the curtain back on a lot of the mental health struggles people were going through. A lot of people came face to face with the depression and anxiety, with the loneliness and isolation that they were dealing with in their lives. And I think this is our opportunity to have a more honest, a more open conversation about mental health, so that hopefully all of our kids can grow up in a world where they realize that if you struggle with your mental health, it doesn't mean that you're fundamentally flawed, where they also know that if they struggle, that there's help available to them.
I just wanted to say, sorry,
Sure,
one
yeah.
thing. I love saying that now, like mental and physical health, if we take care of both of them, we can become our own superhero. Mm-hmm. My kids call me Aquaman. So I guess now I'm trying to be a better Aquaman to work on both sides of that, right? And I think it's just, and then another point you brought up was asking for help. Mm. That was something I didn't know how to do. I was afraid to do for a long time because I was afraid of the answer. So for me, when I finally asked for help, it was incredible. Right? Like there were people that were willing to help, and there were people that were close to me that were willing to help. And again, that changed and saved my life.
Yeah. And just one quick reflection on that. There's this notion I think sometimes we have around strength, and we sort of define strength in a particular way in society as the person who's not reliant on anyone else, who never expresses any weakness, who never has a bad day, and who never has a moment of doubt. And that is just not real. That's just not what people are like, right? But strength, in my mind, strength is really about the courage to be real and authentic. It's about the courage to be kind. It's about the courage to reach out to someone else and extend help and support when you see them struggling, even though that might feel a little awkward, or you might not know if you're welcome. Like that's what real strength is about. And I think as we think about not just a current generation, but as we think about kids who are growing up today, they're learning from our example, from how we're leading our lives. The three of us have small children at home. Mine are 5 and 7. And somebody once told me when I became a dad, they said, your kids will sometimes listen to what you say, sometimes, but they'll more often listen to what you do. And so it's how we lead our lives, the example we set around issues like mental health, that I think is going to be really powerful in guiding our kids to approach mental health in a healthy way.
I heard a theme here about mental and physical health, mental and physical well-being, and if I'm hearing it correctly, we can't separate them. And so if you're training, Naomi, and your knee is really bothering you and you're limping, you're going to seek out help right away. You're going to say, hey, my knee needs to be fixed. Or you have severe chest pain and you're having trouble breathing, you go to the emergency room. And so it's embedded in us that we seek care for our physical ailments, but not our mental ones. But there I heard something else, I believe, about loneliness. And that what does that really mean? And so, Vivek, you wrote a Surgeon General advisory on loneliness. And if you haven't read it, I encourage everyone to read it. It's out there in the public domain. But you talk about loneliness as something that's physical, like hunger, like being thirsty. Or I'll use another example. Let's say that we're all just walking in a park, and then all of a sudden, something happens unexpectedly. So what happened, I guarantee you, in 3/1000ths of a second. For those of you who weren't asleep and you were all of a sudden caught unawares, in 3/1000ths of a second, your pupils dilated, your muscles contracted, your heart started beating more rapidly, and only after all of that did you be consciously aware of the fact that you were afraid. So we have certain core feelings that are so deeply embedded in us for our survival: fear, hunger, thirst. And we like to think as rational human beings that we control that, but we become aware of it. And if we don't address it, if let's say fear isn't addressed because of trauma, that physiological expression stays embedded in us, leads to post-traumatic stress disorder with physical and mental consequences. If hunger is not addressed, it can lead to physical and mental consequences. And loneliness, which we don't think of in that way, but I think in a brilliant manner, Vivek, you capture that as something so essential to the human being. We are meant to be social, to be connected with one another, to express our love to one another. So if you wouldn't mind explaining a little bit, elaborating more on that concept of loneliness, which is a physical and a mental construct, and it kind of ties in with what we've been talking about already.
Sure. Well, thanks, Brian. And this is not an issue I ever thought I would work on in public health, to be honest with you, but I was really educated by people across our country and across the world, as I traveled. And I started to realize that a lot of people were actually struggling with the sense of loneliness and isolation. And the more I dug into it, I realized two things. One is that loneliness is exceedingly common. In the US, 1 in 2 adults report measurable levels of loneliness, and the numbers are actually much higher among young people. But the other thing I realized was just how consequential loneliness was. It was far more than a bad feeling, but when we struggle with loneliness and isolation, that we're actually at increased risk for depression, anxiety, and suicide. But we're also at increased risk for physical illness. Our risk of heart disease goes up. Our risk of dementia goes up by 50% among older adults. Our risk of premature death goes up as well. And so there are biological reasons for this, and it comes back down to the fact that human connection is necessary for survival, that we evolved over thousands of years in interdependent relationships to need one another, which is why it's so ironic now that we have somehow made it seem like a source of weakness if you need other people in your life, if you're not completely, self-sufficient. It's just not how we developed over time. The reason I think that this is so important right now is because we have been dealing with a silent epidemic of loneliness, not just in America, but in many countries around the world. Countries like the UK and Australia, Japan, and others have taken notice of this, have actually set about to think about national efforts that can be directed at addressing loneliness. When we issued our advisory recently, we laid out a framework for a national strategy as well to address loneliness and isolation in America. But the truth is, if we do not address this, we will hurt more than our health. But we'll also hurt the fundamental underpinnings of society. When societies are more connected, they have lower rates of violence, they're more economically prosperous, they're more resilient in the face of adversity. But when they are not, when they're disconnected, then they're more easily divided than when there's an adverse event, let's say in pandemic or another threat that comes along. It's harder for people to pull together and support one another. It's easier for them to become polarized. And so for all of these reasons, addressing loneliness, rebuilding social connection in our lives, and stitching together the social fabric of society remains, in my mind, one of the most pressing public health and societal challenges that we're dealing with today.
Well, I want to thank you, Vivek, for bringing that to our country's and the world's attention, because these are profound words. But Naomi and Michael, you've been on the world stage, and we can look at you and we could potentially do something harmful to you. We can objectify you, that you're this god or goddess and you're not human, you don't need this human connection. But what do these words mean, this concept that we can be on the world stage and feel lonely? We can be in a state of loneliness. Does that resonate with you? And how do we come to terms with that?
You're a better talker.
Okay. When I think of loneliness, I just think of a feeling, right? And when I think of feelings, I think that we all have those feelings and we all go through these feelings and emotions, right? So if we're going through something, it's just something normal. For me, my loneliness looks like a dark room and it's closing. And I feel alone. And I felt alone a lot during the pandemic. But through the tools that I've gained through my own mental health journey, I was able to get through. And look, some of my tools are just talking to people, right? Like whether it's texting a friend, checking in on them, whether it's calling my therapist, whether it's reaching out to a best friend. Like I have a bunch of groups that we just check in on one another because we have to, right? They're my friends, they're my homies. Like these are the people I love the most. And I just want to make sure we're all doing this together, right? Because what is it? It's like 1 in 4 people struggle with some kind of mental health. How come 1 in every 4 people aren't talking about it?
Exactly.
That's for me. That's the one thing I want to change. That's the main reason why I opened up and talked about it. I just said, why not? I don't remember what the question was, but I just said, all right, let's go. I remember a reporter asked me a question, and I just unloaded it all. And it felt amazing. I didn't feel lonely anymore.
Oh, no, it's my turn. Well, when I think of loneliness, to be honest, I think of like periods of time. So I think of like when I last felt it. And for me, I actually felt lonely during my pregnancy. Just because I felt like I wasn't able to do a lot of things that I was normally able to do. And I think it kind of goes back into like asking for help too, for me. I learned a lot, like normally I'm thinking like I'm gonna be an independent woman and I'm not gonna ask anyone for help and stuff like that, and just whenever something happens, just like take it on the chin. But then I got to a place where I needed to ask for help and I wanted to like reach out and talk to people. And I think like most of the time for me, like I have a really good group of people around me and they want to help, but I just never asked. So I think it was just the process of asking and the process of like, I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was pride or something that made me not ask for help and made me feel like I was isolated. But I'm really happy the people around me just wanted me to ask for help. And
so you talk about wanting to be an independent woman, and I think we all would like to say, well, yeah, I'm independent. And what's the difference between being an independent woman, being a leader for women in our society, while also being interdependent? And I think that's what you were speaking about, Vivek, that the essence of who we are as human beings, we are interdependent, we are social. Can we do both, and that actually maybe allows us to be even more independent?
Oh, that was for me. Sorry.
For anyone, but
You know, like I started thinking about it as like a team. Like for me, you see me as the athlete that plays, you know, the sport, but actually there's a whole team behind me. And I started thinking about it like that. Like, I think as humans, we all care for each other. And like, if anyone asked me for help, I would automatically help them. Like, there wouldn't be anything in my mind. And I just kind of thought about it like that. Like, independence is great, but if I'm able to get to the same goal in like a quicker time or like, you know, in a better way that doesn't affect my mental health as much, I think I'm also fine with that.
well, Michael, you, in many ways, I imagine, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you always had a team. But when you're in that pool, it's you, and with your physical discipline, your mental discipline, your independence. But how do you take this concept of independence, and now you're talking about seeking help, but you're also being a world leader and encouraging others, you're saving lives. So what does that mean to you, this independence, interdependence? And
I mean, echo exactly what, you know, a lot of what Naomi said. It wasn't just me going through everything every single day. I had a team around me all the time that was supporting me, and that was the reason why I was able to do what I did. You know, I think I learned that I couldn't do it all by myself. As much as I wanted to take on absolutely everything in my power that I could possibly think that I could handle, I can't do it. I found out the hard way I couldn't do it. So again, yeah, me just asking for help, I think was just a big eye-opening experience for me. You know, being able to have somebody say yes, they wanted to help me. Again, like I felt like I was all alone for so long. And when somebody said that to me, I mean, you like say it sends you back, right? I was so surprised, and I guess since then it's like I typically don't shove anything down anymore. I just say whatever it is, and I get it all out in the open. Never compartmentalize, never carry that stuff along, because I don't want to do stuff by myself. It gets lonely by yourself, and we're all working towards the same exact goal together.
And Vivek, I've heard you speak before, and just now your experience with patients as a great clinician, and I've had experience with patients as well. Patients, not necessarily being patient, but taking care of patients, no. But how do we help society, our patients at large in society, understand that it's okay to ask for help? There are different ways of asking for help, including the buddy system that you two have talked about so well, but maybe even at another level, there's professional healthcare seeking. But how do you see that, and what's the message for all of us here in terms of it's okay to ask for help, and sometimes it's okay to ask for professional help?
Mm-hmm. Well, one good thing is certainly in the United States, in the last couple of years, there have been more and more efforts to make help more available. So there's now a crisis line, 988, just 3 digits that anyone can call or text if they're having a mental health crisis, and they can be connected to a trained counselor. There also has been more of an investment in telemedicine, using technology to provide care at a distance, investing in bringing more counselors into schools, more money into training programs for psychiatrists and psychologists. And there needs to be even more done, because there's been a big gap in providing care. But all of the steps to provide more options for care won't be enough if people don't feel comfortable asking for help. And that's where culture change comes in. You can't, legislate or pass some law that says that people should feel comfortable asking for help. That's about our attitudes and beliefs. And I think that changes, one, when people lead by example. And that's one of the reasons I'm so deeply appreciative of what Naomi and Michael have done in using their own stories and sharing of their own experiences. And that has, I know, reached millions of people. It's not, although, just about community leaders like Naomi and Michael. It's also about people in communities themselves, moms and dads, who might choose to talk about mental health or get help themselves. That sends a message to their kids. When teachers, or when a boss at work or a coworker decides that they're going to seek out help, that sends a message to people around them that, hey, this is okay to do. So reaching out for help and leading by example is powerful. But we also, I think, need to have more conversations in our schools, in our workplaces, about mental health the way we do about any other health topic, right? We might talk about, hey, if you get injured, here at work, call someone in this department, they can help you get first aid, etc. We should be thinking about mental health in a similar context, again, treating it just like physical health. And finally, I think from a cultural perspective, I think one thing we can also do is broaden our notion of who can help with mental health, that it's not just psychologists and therapists and psychiatrists, but it turns out that each of us has the power to help other people when it comes to our mental health and well-being, regardless of our age, regardless of our training. And we provide that help by showing up for other people, by checking on them, by listening to how they're doing. So many times we'll ask someone, hey, how are you? And we just keep going, right? But if we actually pause and listen to how someone is doing, here's what you do. When you listen to someone honestly, openly, with your full attention, you're telling them that they matter. You're telling them that they're valued and that they're seen. And I always have believed that there are three things we all need, regardless of what country, what culture we come from. As human beings, we all want to be seen and understood for who we are. We all want to know that we matter, and we all want to be loved. And you can convey all three things to someone else simply by checking on them and by listening to them, by being there for them during a time of need. So I know sometimes we worry, hey, am I intruding on someone's life? If I'm asking about how they're doing, am I invading their privacy? But this is a moment, I think, where we need to respectfully take the initiative to check on others, because too many people are out there struggling on their own, wishing that somebody would just ask them how they're doing or give them a space to be open. And instead, what society too often tells them is to put on a brave face and to, in their social media posts, in their public conversation and how they present their public image, to just make it seem like everything is going great, even though they are struggling inside.
I just want to say, I'll put one thing at the end of that. It's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
Remember that.
And maybe, we talked about this a little bit this morning. You're almost talking about we're all here for each other. It's a group system. There's a formal term for that. It's called bystander intervention. So the bystander effect is, let's say you're walking in Manhattan and you see something horrible happening on the street, you just keep walking. Bystander intervention is we learn to be buddies to one another. So if I were involved in that, I would learn, and we all should learn, that let's say Michael is more withdrawn, or that he's not showing up to practice, or Naomi says something and it concerns me, or Vivek is all of a sudden eating differently in a way that I know is not right. And so I think what you're inviting us to do is to use the bystander effect in terms of intervening and say, hey, how's it going, Vivek? Or, Naomi, you weren't at practice today, everything all right. But when I ask you, I'm being present. And I'm truly waiting for the answer, and you understand that I'm waiting for the answer because you matter. I'm validating you. Or, Michael, where have you been lately? And so, have you all do you have a buddy system, and can you elaborate on that and its importance? I'll say at the NCAA level, it may be the most important thing we're doing with our 500,000 student athletes. The buddy system, bystander intervention, know how to care for one another, because we're here in this as a group activity, as a human activity together.
I do. I'll say I'll bring one person up, Chuck Barkley. Him and I go back and forth randomly the most awkward hours. We just check in on one another. He's just always checking in on me. And I have a few friends like that. And in moments, I'll be going through some kind of spiral, whatever you want to call it, and bing, one of those my phone lights up, a text comes through, and I'm able to relax, right? Because you don't feel alone in that moment. So I just think those things for me are life-changing. Just being able to have some kind of open communication, right? That's something for me that was a challenge for a long time. I was really good at compartmentalizing and probably could have won a few more gold medals, but It's not something to be proud of by that. I'm saying in compartmentalization. I could have won more medals there, but it's just getting things out, right? For me, it's always trying to get things out in the open, because the more you're carrying it, the heavier that backpack gets on your back. So just open communication. I make the joke, I learned to communicate at the age of 30, but at least we got there. And I'm just trying to do that every single day, because if I'm getting it out, somebody's listening. Whether it's my wife, whether it's my therapist, whether it's my friend, whether it's a coach, it doesn't matter. Somebody's there, and somebody is always caring. So honestly, like the two things that I always try to remember is be you, and it's okay to not be okay. Be your authentic self. That's what I try to do every single day.
What about the buddy system? Is that a concept that makes sense for you, and how do you employ it?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that you said. But also, I'm sorry, I was laughing a little because as an example, you said like, hey, Naomi, if you said something concerning, but everything I say is a bit concerning, so I'm not sure if that would work. But yeah. Yeah, I think like for me, definitely like reaching out to my friends. Whenever I'm feeling sad, like back when I was traveling for tennis, whenever like I have to go overseas and stuff and I'm feeling a bit lonely, I found out that like reaching out to my friends, no matter what hour, they'll pick up because they care for me. And I think that that's something that is really important. And through that, I kind of learned to care for myself a lot too. So.
And sometimes we learn that a strength is if we find out how to surround ourselves by people who listen, who care for us and love for us. But Michael, you mentioned something which is going to take this as segue. You get a text message in the middle of the night or sometime, and it can help you. And so there's this concept out there of social media. Well, it's a little more than a concept by now, right? But social media is ever present. Naomi and Michael, you have really big social media presences, and I think you're positively influencing a lot of people with your social media. But it's possible, maybe probable, that you've gotten some negative social media posts where someone says something hurtful or even worse. And Vivek, in your last Surgeon General advisory, again, I encourage everyone to read this. It's on social media and youth mental health. And you approach this, again, from a public health perspective. Yes, social media can be a good, but there's a lot we don't know about it. And is it possible, especially in our youth, that they are fundamentally being shaped by social media, which is, on the one hand, they think they're connected to this vast universe. On the other hand, they're not actually developing human connection. So can you share with us, Vivek, this last advisory the most recent advisory on social media, some of your concerns, and then I would like to hear from Michael and Naomi if these concerns make sense to you as well.
Well, sure, Brian. Well, I'm a believer in technology. I spent a number of years building a technology company before I was in government. I used technology a fair amount. And my belief is that whether technology is a tool at the end of the day, whether it helps or hurts us depends on how it's designed and ultimately on how it's used. And my worry with social media is that what has happened over the last 20 years is that we have put this technology out there. It has been dramatically adopted. And while there have been some positive benefits to some people, I do worry that many people are actually being harmed by it, and that it has become an important contributor to the youth mental health crisis that we're seeing in the United States and possibly in other countries as well. And here's what we're seeing in the data, and this is what led me to actually issue this advisory. Actually, I'll tell you the most important thing that led me to issue this advisory were conversations with parents. Everywhere I went in America, the most common question I got from parents was about social media. And they asked me, is this safe for my kids? Is it hurting my kids? That was the number one question by far. So the data that we found that was concerning was that people who were using 3 hours or more of social media a day, and this is adolescents, faced double the risk of anxiety and depression symptoms. And that was particularly concerning because the average amount of use in the US is 3.5 hours a day by adolescents. So it's in excess of that. What was also concerning is that nearly half of adolescents were saying that using social media made them feel worse about their body image. And many were also saying, about a third of adolescents, that they were staying up until midnight or later on weeknights using their screens, and a lot of that was social media time, which was taking away from their sleep. And we know that particularly during adolescence, which is a critical time of brain development, that when you're deprived of sleep, that actually increases your risk for poor mental health outcomes. So you put all of this together, and what came out to me were really two things. One is that we did not actually have enough evidence to say, from a scientific perspective, that social media is safe for your kids, to the question that parents were asking me. But the second thing is that there was growing evidence that social media use can be harmful to many adolescents. And so this has been my point of concern around it. And I think that, look, there's clearly some good that can happen with social media. Good messages, positive messages can get out to the public. It can be used in ways that can sometimes give people a forum for expression and for creativity. But what we have to do is, in some ways, what we did with automobiles 20, 30 years ago. When I was growing up, the rate of motor vehicle fatalities was very high in the United States. Now, we didn't say, you know what, let's just scrap cars and go back to horses and buggies, right? Like, we didn't say that. We also didn't say, you know what, there's nothing we can do. This is just a feature of modern life. Let's just put up with all of these deaths. We said, you know what, we need to find a way to make this new technology, in this case cars, safer, right? And we put in place safety standards that gave us seatbelts and airbags and other features that helped reduce motor vehicle deaths over time. And here, too, I think we actually need a similar approach. This technology should be designed in an age-appropriate way. It should be designed with the kind of safeguards on it that reduce the likelihood people will be exposed to harmful content, that they will be harassed or bullied or abused online, which is happening to too many people, or that they'll be subject to features that prey on the minds of people and that are addictive in nature and that ultimately lead them to excessive use, which then takes away from sleep, in-person time for exercise. So this is a journey that we're on now, and it's an urgent journey because these platforms are widely used, they're widely available, but I worry about the amount of harm that's accruing to people. And I also look, at the end of the day, in-person time is really valuable. We have been designed over thousands of years to interact with each other in person. And a lot of what happens online isn't always a reflection of real life, right? We see people's best days posted online. We see their curated versions of the world, but there's no substitute for actually being in person with people. So I think it's important for us to recognize that, to require companies actually share data that they have on the mental health impacts of their platforms, because right now researchers say they can't get full access to that data, which is, to me as a parent, is very concerning. That information is being hidden from me. But we need these safety measures, these safety standards in place as well, and we need them to be enforced. So ultimately, in my mind, that is how we take a technology and ensure that it's ultimately helping us and not harming us.
Yeah, and your message was loud and clear. Another advisory we should all be reading. Naomi, Michael, just so you know, here at the US Open, along with the rest of the tennis world, we're taking steps to find a way to monitor social media, to put in those safeguards. But you're active users, and does that resonate with you that it can be potentially harmful?
You were starting.
Well, for me, my social media is who I am. You'll see me post quotes that sometimes I just needed to see, and it means I was having a bad day, and that's okay. There are times where I post happy faces, and that's because I'm actually happy. You get the authentic me whenever you're on my site, or whenever you're on my platforms. I have been harassed. I've had people wish things on my kids, on my family. It's wrong. It's ridiculous. And to your point, like with 3 young kids coming up, it scares me. I want them to have the best experience as they can, and then also be able to be who they are and not be ashamed of who they are. So yeah, I mean, I agree. It's good and bad. But again, I always try to use it for good. I always try to use it to get my messages across, and then I get off. I don't read comments. I try not to. When I started getting death threats, I just basically turned off my phone. So just because I don't want to be around it, right? And it makes me feel blah, and then my thoughts start running, and I separate myself.
Naomi?
Yeah, I don't want to like sound the exact same, but exactly the same. I don't know. I feel like somewhere along the line, I definitely got very scared of social media. Like, I don't know. I felt like there was too much I didn't know about it. Like, it was, I think, fear of the unknown, which I still am a little worried, you know. But then I think of the times that I do use social media, it's like to cheer people up or like, you know, to show people what I'm up to and to look at Beyonce's outfits or something.
But like, do you, like, if you don't want to post, like, you just don't post, right?
Yeah, you know,
Right.
and then I also try not to look at comments, like, and it makes me sad because, like, before people knew who I was, like, there's people giving me, like, positive messages, you know, so it's, like, a little sad, I feel, to miss out on that, but I think for my mental health, like, potentially seeing something really bad, it's not worth it, but yeah.
So we have 3 minutes left, and so I want to use part of the 3 minutes for the four of us on stage. We're going to make a pledge together. And that is, I really believe this, taking what you wrote in the last advisory on social media and working together, working with everyone in this room to get the message out that we need to understand its impact, and we need to understand we are in an age where we don't know what's happening to our youth. We don't have the science or the medical evidence to understand the negative impact. And so we can start working on that just to help get the word out, just as we're getting the word out about mental health. Good pledge, right?
I love it.
So also, maybe we just have a final moment to say, well, how do we wrap this up? And I don't even know if we have enough time for all of us to give a final moment, but this morning, Michael, you gave a moment about parenting and something about the lion's breath, and so if you could share that with all of us.
So as a dad I have 3 boys, 7, 5, and 3, and you know, when they kind of get at each other and there's a lot of this, there's a lot of yelling and screaming, they kind of sit down and they take this big deep breath, and then they get to roar as loud as they can possibly roar like a lion. And typically when they do that, their shoulders drop and they're able to say, well, Beckett did this, or Boomer did this, or I felt this, or I was angry. And for me as a dad, you know, for so long I didn't know how to express those things. And now as a 7, 5, and 3-year-old, they're sitting there doing it right in front of my face. It's just an incredible thing to watch, and for any new parents, give it a try. Might be really loud though, but just give it a whirl.
Well, going back, Vivek, to what you said as a parent, don't do what I say, but you lead by example, and I think you're leading by example. So,
Well, that's one of the, I think, the hardest things, you know, just to be clear about it, is I think a lot of times as parents we know what we want to do, but we may fall short in doing it. And I think part of this broader conversation around mental health is about a cultural shift to give ourselves and others more grace and forgiveness, and to just recognize that we're all trying our best. We're all imperfect at times. We're all going to fall short. Sometimes we're going to say the wrong thing, use the wrong word. But just to recognize that we're all on a journey here and that we need each other's support and help. You know, I've struggled many times in my own life with my mental health as a kid, you know, many times later on as an adult as well. And as a kid, I never talked about it because I was ashamed, right? I thought, hey, I'm the only one on this journey and something is wrong with me. So there are still many people out there who are feeling that. And I think if we just can approach our lives and other people with a little bit more grace and forgiveness, extend the kind of support that they need, recognizing that a lot of people are suffering in silence, I think we can make big steps forward in terms of improving mental health and well-being and shifting the culture to being more open about it as well.
well, on those words of grace and forgiveness, really want to thank everyone for being here with us today. I really want to especially thank Vivek, Naomi, Michael. You're just incredible leaders, and I look forward to continuing this journey with you and with everyone here in this room. So thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you. you, everybody, for joining us, and thank everybody who is watching on the stream today.